Hello friends, so in the previous lecture we had an introduction about outdoor air as sources to indoor air, and we also looked at ventilation process. In this lecture we will look at infiltration process, and we will also touch upon the health indoors which may be attributed to the outdoor air pollution and transfer of course to the indoor air. So we will do a recap. So there are different processes by which aerosol and pollutants can enter. I've written aerosols because the next slides is on aerosols. So you have ventilation, which we have done previously, and then we have these outdoor pollutants entering through infiltration. So as you see here, cracks on a building and these sort of openings within a door. It's a closed door, but there is always some gap between the door and the bottom of the floor. So the aerosol and other pollutants can potentially come inside through all these openings. So when we look, several physical processes will be influencing these particles infiltration. So now we have the suspended particles in the outside air, and they are sort of flowing inside. So when they are flowing or the air is outdoor air is infiltrating inside. So the suspended particles will follow this infiltrating air. So that's okay. Outside they are infiltrating, but one, they have to pass through the opening, they have to pass through the cracks or whatever opening there is under the door, let's say. So they have to pass through without getting deposited. Plus when they are coming inside, then again they have different physical processes, for example, which they will face. So these kind of processes are basically gravity based or surface inertia and surface based, and particle deposition surfaces will be determined by gravimetric, so just deposition, then movement of particles due to charges on the walls or the building surfaces in the certain conditions, and the temperature driven transport of particles. We will look this more in the lectures on aerosols. So they will follow the infiltrating air, but again they may pass or they may not pass, and then once they pass they will be deposited due to any of these processes, but of course they have to pass also. So when we are talking about aerosol infiltration, there are physical properties of particulate matter which will add another level of complexity to this infiltration process. So here we have like different types of cracks I have shown as an illustration. So like a smaller or a less wide or less wide crack running through next to like a window. This appears to be a little bit wider crack on a wall. This is also a wall more close to the ceiling. So let us say the crack runs through the thickness of the building. Of course, if it's a really thick building, maybe the crack does not run through the entire width of the wall. But if it's a thinner wall, maybe the crack is long enough to go through. So the penetration efficiency of a particle will of course depend on how big the particle is, and we will show some graphs on that. So how big or thick, how large is the particle in terms of the diameter? What are the crack height and length? So you know how much is the opening available for the particle to pass through or the pollutant to pass through. In this case, as also we'll say particle to pass through, and how long the particle has to travel also. So how much width opening is there and how much is the length of the crack. Then pressure differences between indoor and outdoor. If the pressure difference is such that it enables the transport of particle indoor, there will be more. And then the final thing is particle density. So again, physical properties of particles that will actually determine the penetration efficiency of the particle itself until it reaches inside. So for example, we have once inside, then okay, these larger non-volatile particles will be influenced by gravimetric deposition, but the smaller ones will be also affected by the thermokinetic. So temperature driven processes, which means the deposition is not only downwards but also like sideways and upwards could be. So that's why I was saying vertical surfaces meaning the side walls, and downward facing means the ceiling. So the smaller particles can actually attach to anywhere, and in a way you can see it as well, because there are a lot of flat surfaces, vertical surfaces and ceilings, and in our homes we can easily see small dust particles on these vertical surfaces. So these are not going there by gravimetry, but most likely by thermokinetic or electrical processes. So, okay, now aerosol infiltration particle size. So, we have a lower penetration efficiency if the crack is small. This illustration is of looks like to be a fairly large or wide crack. So, if the crack is smaller, there is less chance for a lot of particles to pass through the crack. So, makes sense. Then if the wall is thicker, that means again either the particle will have chance to deposit on the inside wall within the crack itself, so it is not going up but it's going and then attaches, and it's going and attaches and does not reach inside. Also maybe the crack does not maybe run through the wall completely from inside to outside to inside. Then the large and heavier particles will basically be removed by impaction, because the particle will collide the surface, they will lose the energy and deposit within the crack path, let us say. Smaller particles may be driven towards the wall of this crack within the wall and attach itself to the vertical surface and does not reach inside. So all of these can lead to less penetration efficiency. Once again, the smaller the crack, the thicker the wall, and this could be because there is more chance of particle removal within the wall, and also maybe because the crack does not run across the wall. Then the larger and heavier particles, they will be removed because they will likely to impact and at somewhere along the path, and once they are impacting they will lose their energy and deposit. Smaller particles will be thermokinetically driven towards the flat surfaces or vertical surfaces, so they may attach to the sides, and all of this results in less transport of the ultra fine, very small or very small ultra fine particles and the coarser heavier particles to inside. We can further see this in this figure. So aerosol infiltration versus particle size at different parameters. So in this figure we have infiltration factor. So how much infiltration is happening from outside to inside, where 1 means 100% infiltration. On the x-axis we have the diameter 0.01, 0.1, 1 micron, 10 micron. So from 1 onwards we are talking about more coarse particles, and especially in this region we are more coarser region. This is more ultra fine part, and this is somewhat the accumulation mode. And we see horizontal deposition surface area. So surface area available for deposition. So if we see here from 1.5 to 0.33, this is almost a factor 5. So factor 5 deposition area change. So it's 0.3 and 1.5. So regardless of the magnitude of difference in horizontal surface areas, we see the maximum infiltration occurring in this wide range, perhaps around 0.05, 0.06 microns to around maybe 0.5 micron. And so this is one. Now we say okay, this is surface area deposition available. We will look at the same infiltration with respect to particle density. So now again we are talking about particle densities 0.5 to 3. So 6 factor 6 difference. Here we have infiltration rate. So how fast the infiltration is happening. Here again we see that regardless of the particle density, almost factor 1 infiltration occurs when we are again looking at some particle diameter 0.05 to around 0.5 0.6 micron. It is almost exactly the same as this one. So again we see that this accumulation mode particles, these ones, have the highest infiltration rates, whereas the ultra fine particles, they are removed to some extent. Of course, accumulation mode, we're talking about almost 100% infiltration. For ultra fine, we are somewhere between 60 and 80, here also around 80%. And then coarser particles, we are looking at a very low number, around this 50 to less than 10%. Same here, around let's say around 50 to less than 10%. So ultrafine may be removed through penetration, thermokinetic processes, and coarser through the deposition, and the highest infiltration, almost 100% infiltration, is accumulation. So here we have seen particle size and infiltration for horizontal deposition surface area, and for the particle density we will again look at other physical parameters of the crack itself. So crack height. So here we can see that again irrespective of the crack height, we again have the maximum infiltration generally in the accumulation mode. So that's again same thing, almost 80 to 100%. And then the crack length, so 5 to 100, even factor 20, we are again seeing more infiltration in the 0.05 to 0.5 approximately mode. This maximum is almost always the same. Then air exchange rate, again here also regardless of the air exchange rate, and again we are talking about factor 100, we again see that the maximum transport is in the accumulation size range, going as much as again 100% here in this case, and in this case it's a bit lower, 80%, but it is still quite high. Whereas if you go to ultra fine or the coarse, very quickly the infiltration percentages has decreased, especially in the coarser mode. So the take home here is that regardless of the parameter, the maximum infiltration always happens or almost always happens in this accumulation mode. So and then a bit lower in the ultrafine and much lower in the coarser particle range. So what is the take home now? So particle composition of course correlates to the size. So we have primary combustion particles which are mostly in the ultrafine range. They can form the soot agglomerates after emissions, and then they can nucleate, or they can accumulate on top of some nucleation media and grow slowly. So from ultra fine they can slowly grow up to the accumulation range. So we will have nucleation, and then once this accumulation is happening on the top of the nucleating particle, you can of course have the organic as well as inorganic components. So I have written here secondary organic and inorganic components will grow and accumulate, and then from ultra fine they will go on to be in the accumulation range. So this is the ultra fine primary combustion particles of the ultra fine range. Then we have the coarser particles. These are mostly mechanically generated particles, and the sources are such as just soil which is outside, sand, road surfaces, and then the vehicle tires and braking, they may also like release particles which will be either going to the road surface and resuspended, or just suspended by themselves in the air, and depending on their sizes they may go up, or maybe they need resuspension to come up in the air. But these will be mostly the coarser particles, and these of course will be of different composition depending on whether it's soil or tire or brake related or what kind of road surfaces. They will have different physical structure and chemical composition, and also particle sizes. So all this, when we say particle sizes, again quickly we can think about the infiltration is higher in the accumulation mode. So for primary combustion particles, they have to grow. Sometimes they need a substantial amount of time to grow from ultrafine to accumulation. So that amount of time must be given for them to come in accumulation mode, and then once they come in accumulation mode, the chances of infiltration increase. In coarser particles, when these are emitted or resuspended, they will inherently be in the different size bins, and in those size bins, the particles in the accumulation mode will be more important in terms of infiltration. Now we can look at some chemical components. So we have this volatile components such as water, ammonia, nitrates, organic compounds, and these may also be influenced by phase transition from liquid or solid to gaseous form in indoor spaces, or the other way around. It has been found that the infiltration of reactive gases and particles is a bit complex. Reactive gases, they can react with other molecules present in outdoor air or that are generated by indoor sources. They can also react with surfaces and contaminants present. So when no indoor source exists, indoor levels of reactive gases, and some example is ozone, and then could be hydroxyl radical, photochemical oxidants and particles, are typically lower indoors than outdoors. This is because one needs that reactive gas to come from outdoor to indoors. And if it is being infiltrated, it can probably react already outside, or it can, while it is transporting indoors, it may react with the surfaces within the wall, and does not come in then to that level. So these gases generally have lower level in indoor environment when there is no indoor source. Okay, so some health relevant gases we will look at. One is NO2. This is a traffic, basically vehicular combustion related pollutant, but it also has indoor sources which could be like gas appliances. Okay, and then studies have measured the indoor and outdoor levels of NO2, and they have found a wide variability in NO2 levels. Why? Because in some cases they may be generated indoors. So then the indoor to outdoor ratio, we cannot correlate that this measurement is because of outdoor infiltration or ventilation. Then the relation between indoor and outdoor of course is also dependent on the infiltration rate, because maybe there is no infiltration and then we find a wide gradient in outdoor and indoor NO2. Also, when NO2 is coming, it may be absorbed by the building material itself. So either during infiltration or as soon as it comes in, it is sort of absorbed or adsorbed at the building materials. So we have very low or much lower NO2 levels. So there is a substantial variability, because although NO2 is being absorbed, but if there is an indoor source, then it will again spike the NO2 concentration. So the basically NO2 levels inside are very variable if we are trying to study their relation to the outdoor levels. Then the other gas is ozone. It is highly reactive, and in general indoor levels of ozone are much lower in relation to outdoor levels, and the gradient is more than NO2. So like NO2 may be a bit different, ozone is a lot different if there is no indoor source. The exception here is that ambient ozone is concentrations are high in locations with higher solar radiation levels, so there will be more ozone outdoors. So there is more ozone outdoors, but also we know in such kind of places often we may find that in the buildings that are less tight and less well insulated. For example, if there was a very cold region, there you will say, okay, there is a very high insulation in those cold places. In higher solar radiation, sometimes the buildings may be less airtight. Maybe they made it more more ventilated building, let us say. So the uh, buildings there in these areas are sometimes less tight and less well insulated, and therefore there is higher ozone infiltration also, because we are now talking about tightness. So okay, we are not talking about ventilation, we are talking about the about making sure that there is no energy leak from the building, which means we are ensuring there is no cracks if it was airtight. But if it is less airtight, means there are like small vents or cracks or small openings which allow for infiltration. So there is higher ozone infiltration in the warmer and sunny areas generally. And then once they are inside, the indoor ozone can react with VOCs to form submicron particles as well. There is some case studies. So in one study, people evaluated NO2 levels in two school buildings, and it was found that NO2 levels were almost identical. So there was infiltration, and the gradient between outdoor and indoor was not that high. But as we saw earlier, ozone is highly reactive and generally the gradient will be lower, and same thing what they found is indoor ozone levels were almost 25 to 50% lower than the outdoor ozone levels. Indoor ozone levels were 25-50% lower than the outdoor ozone levels. So here we can clearly see that ozone being highly reactive, there is a larger gradient indoors to outdoors. In another study, about 600 houses were studied in Japan in summer and in winter. So there was 20 times difference in outdoor and indoor ozone in winter, because the building was sealed. In winters, you will generally try to seal the building, make sure there is no cool air coming, you make sure that the building is more airtight. And there we also see the 20 times difference between outdoor and indoor levels. But when we were talking in summers, in addition to infiltration, here we are also talking about perhaps some ventilation as well. There was only 3 times difference in outdoor and indoor ozone levels, because there were more indoor and the building was less airtight, so more ozone was coming in. And this was basically also because of building tightness and occupant behavior, and I think both go hand in hand, because in summers a person will go and open the door, and generally during winters the person will close the window. In summers the person will open the window, and in winters the person will close the window. So there is a less chance in winter of ozone coming in and higher chance during summers. So far we have talked about outdoor air coming indoors through ventilation or through infiltration. So if that is true, it implies that we are exposed to outdoor air pollutants in the indoor environment. So a few people studied that, okay, what could be the evidence in that case. So if that is true, that outdoor air is polluting or outdoor air pollutants are coming indoors, then people who are indoors should be exposed more to these pollutants, and there must be some indication that they have some health symptoms, maybe cardiovascular or um, breathing related issues must be more when there is less when there is more incoming of outdoor air to indoor air. So for example, less airtight buildings should have more relevant health effects, because the building is less airtight, outdoor air will come in more, and will cause these different issues such as chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, cardiovascular disease, pneumonia. So there must be some relation perhaps. So then there was some study done in which the prevalence of central AC was taken as a proxy for air tightness, because it was in this study and the study locations, it was considered that if there is a AC, central AC provided, the building had made sure that the building is more airtight. So more the AC, central AC, the more airtight will be the building and the less infiltration that will occur in that building, right? So more central AC means people will make sure that the building is more airtight, because otherwise the AC will not be effective. So more the central AC, the more the building is airtight. The more the building is airtight, the less transport of outdoor air pollutants to indoor. The less transport means the health effects should be better. So let's see what was found. So here we see central AC percentage. So the prevalence of central AC from 0 to 80%, and this is the cardiovascular disease coefficient. And it was found generally that as we have more central AC, which means more air tightness in the building, which means less outdoor air coming indoors, the coefficient for cardiovascular disease indicating CVDs, cardiovascular disease, decreased, which means yes, if you have a more airtight buildings in these situations, less outdoor air was coming in, less outdoor pollutants were coming in, and the people had less CVD coefficient, or the CVD coefficient was less. Let's see for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Here again we have central AC coverage from 0 to 80%, and again we see a small decrease or some decrease in the COPD coefficient as well, which means the more airtight the building, there was less COPD, which means less outdoor pollution coming in, less COPD. Now let us see with the central AC percent and pneumonia. So more central AC, the slope is less pronounced than this one and this one. There is a minor decrease here when they plot the central line. So again, the more the central AC, the more airtight the building and the less infiltration occurring, and therefore less pneumonia, let us say. So there is some indication that the outdoor air pollutants do impact the indoor health. So of course, how do we do that now? How do we reduce the infiltration of pollutants? So especially if we are talking about outdoor sources coming in, we must have energy efficiency of buildings and better insulation, because these will ensure the building is more airtight, which means less of the outdoor pollution is coming in. A more careful selection of materials indoors so that there is less emissions. Accurate or optimum ventilation, because if the sources are indoors, we need a good ventilation, but if the sources are outdoors, we don't need so much ventilation, so we have to optimize the air tightness and how the ventilation is controlled. This is what it is basically. See, overall design, having more airtight buildings reduce infiltration of outdoor air, but having more airtight tight building means less ventilation, but we need ventilation to dilute indoor air pollutants. So the overall design has to be very carefully done. So in summary, now in the last few lectures we have seen that outdoor air does affect the indoor human health, and infiltration in addition to ventilation is an important process influencing outdoor air transport to indoors. This is being observed for both aerosol particles basically and gases, and aerosol infiltration is mostly in accumulation mode, not in that much in ultrafine, a little bit less and much less in the coarser mode. Gases such as NO2 and ozone can infiltrate, but to varying extents, because depends on how much reactive the gases are and what is the air tightness of the building. So now we have looked at the infiltration and ventilation. In the next lecture, we will try to explore more quantitatively the indoor-outdoor air pollutant relationship.